Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Just Another Esports podcast. Once again, joined by me, your host, Nicholas Shady Bacon, and my co-host, Mr. Kevin Hubers. We have him back. It is no longer going to be a solo podcast for me. Hopefully, that won't happen again, as I get very dehydrated during those long spiels. But this past weekend, we saw the first week of Stage 4 matches. Not really, there weren't any upsets on this weekend. The coin finally did not go 50-50. It got quite close. All it really needed was Dallas to pull out a crazy upset over against Toronto, I guess, or
Right.
for any of the other matchups to go its way. But it was finally wrong for more than 5 of the matches. So finally, I guess that crazy streak it was going on of being 50% week by week has been broken. But me and you, we had some really solid weeks in our predictions.
For sure.
Uh, Funnily enough, you got both of the Florida matchups wrong, and I got one of the Florida matchups wrong. So once again, Florida throws a wrench in our plans of having a perfect prediction week. But you went 8 for 10. I went 9 for 10. So I would say a pretty solid performance from us
For sure.
on that end. Little pat on the back. But we're going to be diving into those matches. We're going to revisit the power rankings for the first time since the start of, I guess, the preseason. And then obviously we'll round out the episode with our predictions going into week 2 of Stage 4. So kicking off the first week of Stage 4 matches, we saw Paris going up against Atlanta. Now, this was a very David versus Goliath kind of story. Obviously, Paris, they just made that roster change, taking out Classic, bringing Zaptius, and Atlanta, they had just won the Stage 3 majors. So we didn't really put too much faith in this Paris Legion lineup to be able to really do anything up against Atlanta FaZe. However, I do think they surprised me a bit in this matchup, putting up more of a fight than I think I would have expected, having taken one map and playing some of the other maps very close against this Atlanta FaZe roster.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, Paris played not terribly against Atlanta. I've seen other teams get dogged on by Atlanta harder than Paris did. So it seems like an unwinnable game anyway. In all honesty, I mean, Paris is Paris and Atlanta is beast. Like they look unstoppable, but Paris is starting to look a little bit better. They're starting to look a little bit more coherent. I don't know if they're ready to start winning yet, but they're starting to figure things out. And I think it's too little, too late. I'm pretty sure they're out of the playoffs, but I mean, their weekend performance wasn't bad though. I will say that their games against Minnesota were played pretty closely, but Minnesota is kind of fallen from grace, so to speak. That honeymoon has kind of disappeared. So, and it was really evident. I mean, they played a really, really close hard point. Both of those hard points were really close. The control kind of spiraled out of hand in Minnesota's favor, but it wasn't awful. It wasn't the worst control I've seen. And the search is what they won. And Paris's search and destroy actually looks pretty solid, if I may say so myself.
It went 6-1 in Atlanta FaZe on standoff and 6-1 against Minnesota on raid. So their search and destroy was definitely really strong this past weekend. It was just kind of their other modes that they couldn't really get anything together. I mean, they got blown out on their best hardpoint map, which was their Garrison. They had a really solid 8-3 record, or actually going into the weekend they had an 8-2 record on that map, and then they lost it both to Atlanta FaZe and then to the Minnesota Rocker. They had some close hard points up against Atlanta FaZe. However, their control game, it still is simply too weak. They lost both of those 3-1. It was really only their S&D that was getting them even to kind of that second hard point. And while that performance, you could look at that and be like, oh, wow, that was a really good showing up against Atlanta FaZe. I mean, they only lost the hard points by 40 points to, maximum in those two maps versus Atlanta FaZe. However, you look at Minnesota, and Minnesota's not a good team by any means. They're falling down the standings. They're only 10 points ahead of Florida Mutineers, and it's looking like that gap is going to be closed quite quickly if Florida keeps up kind of the performance that we saw from them this weekend.
True.
And bringing in Major Maniac for the Minnesota Rocker was definitely quite a lateral move. They didn't really make any improvements, and one could maybe argue that they even look worse with him in the roster.
I will say that Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go. I was just going to say they barely went up here against Paris, and they got absolutely destroyed
Right.
by Optic Chicago.
I will say that Major Maniac looked great in the Search and Destroy, which is where they felt like they needed to improve. And over time, you got to give a guy like that, some more time back into the rotation in order to see how the respawns are going to work. Not to mention that, I mean, like Major Maniac's always been the guy that like he'll run that like weird flank route and just run right back to the team or do some like weird shit. Um, this game, you can get rewarded for that, but only in search. Hardpoint and control are very streamlined at this point, which is where we need to be at. I'm not gonna discount the move yet, but part of me thinks that the wrong player was benched. Um, Maybe accuracy could come back for Priesta. What do you think?
I haven't seen, or I haven't been paying too much attention, I guess, Priest's performance on the Minnesota roster as of recently. I think when they brought in Standy, we saw some major improvements from Priesta.
Yes.
However, if maybe there's a deeper seated issue with his play style, then kind of within the roster, then maybe that's why you would make a change. I think at first, before they acquired Standy, I think keeping Major Maniac and swapping out Priesta would have been the right decision. However, at this point, I honestly think they should have just kept accuracy and tried to work through some of the issues that they might have had together as a team,
Yeah.
and kept in Priesta with Standy and with Attach. I think that squad looked better than kind of what we're the current form that we are seeing. I mean, I'm still taking into account accuracy played all of stage 3 during Ramadan, so he wasn't
True.
eating for a large portion of the day, and that can definitely take a toll on a player's performance.
Right.
And so I would have loved to see how he was going to perform in the stage 4. And if this change doesn't work for them and they're going to go back to accuracy after this stage, then you only have one stage of prep before champs, which is not good. So this this should be their final change. And I don't know if it was the right one in Minnesota's case.
I don't know. So I do know that the subs are correct for sure. Like Attach and Standy work really well together. That's a given. Standy does really well as flex. He kind of reminds me of Dashy, sort of. A kind of like Mr. Do It All, or like a Dylan Envoy, where you're running around and yeah, more like Envoy, less like Dashy, because um, he's like the good old boy. Go get the trophies, go. Uh, you're running the engineer, you're making those IGL call outs, you're doing all that stuff. And it's been really nice to see him develop into that leader. Um I think that once they find the balance between accuracy, Priesta, and Major Maniac, whoever those three work the best together, then we can see some sparks fly. Um
Yeah, I just think it's kind of too little, too late for the Minnesota. I just don't have faith in them. I think they're just going to end up where kind of they ended up last season. In all honesty,
sure.
they have a decent sized point gap between them and the LA Gorillas, and that I think is really their saving grace and is what like their early season performance is honestly what's going to keep them at champs. Since I think that point gap might just be a bit too large for the Gorillas or any of the other teams in the bottom 8 to realistically make up, especially with kind of Florida's increased performance that we'll touch on later. But yeah, I just don't really have a lot of faith in this Minnesota roster right now, and I think their performance this past week, even though they got a win over the Paris Legion, kind of solidifies uh, my opinion on them. But the other team that we saw in one of Paris's matchup was Atlanta FaZe. Looked stellar. Well, maybe not stellar in their Paris matchup since they got obliterated on standoff S&D. And then they had 2 really close hard points up against the Paris Legion. I think Atlanta FaZe is feeling a little bit of the brunt of not having their 7-2 checkmate in that
Right.
search and destroy pool. So we might see they're not that great on, it seems, the BO2 S&D maps. They had a lot
Yeah.
of express S&D woes early on. I feel like they're starting to get the hang of that, but that express S&D was not good.
Right.
We're gonna put it bluntly. However, they were really good in the last match of the weekend, which was up against the Chicago Optic. They 3-0 stomped them. It was not even close.
Yeah, it was a
The
beatdown.
closest thing was the S&D, which was 6-4, but Atlanta felt like they were in control of that pretty much the entire time.
Yeah.
So Atlanta's still looking good. Shifting the focus to Chicago, I mean, they 3-0 obliterated Minnesota, and then they get absolutely creamed by Atlanta FaZe. Kind of, what do you think's going on over in the Chicago camp? Like,
We got a lot of college COD coaches saying it's a coaching thing, and I mean, they are just college COD coaches. But whenever you've got that many of them saying that it's got to be a coach thing, then you start to think about it, and maybe it is a coaching thing. I don't think it's any of the players. All the players in their own right are some of the best in the world. Um, how they play day to day, I mean, that's just COD, right? Um, that being said, um, it's just I don't know. I think Maniac is doing a really good job at trying to keep the vibes in order, but maybe his lack of like competitive COD knowledge is holding him back. And Cinder, while he's a smart guy, I think him in general, maybe General should have been the coach, and Cinder, I don't know. I feel like they have the ability to get anybody in the world, and this is where the chips fell. Not saying anything really bad about Cinder, but um, I don't know. Maybe he needs help. That's all I'm saying. Be like Atlanta FaZe. Go buy another coach. They picked up Tupac to fix their search, and I mean, who knows? So
yeah, for me, it kind of just dwindles down to I honestly, Atlanta FaZe is just a really poor matchup for Optic, uh, specifically since a lot of their map pool overlaps quite heavily, especially in kind of. I mean, they lost to Atlanta FaZe. They
sure,
lost to the best team in the game currently. Uh, it was a 3-0. Obviously, you'd like to see a better performance from them. But I think a lot of it does have to go down to the kind of the overlapping map pools that they have, like what they're good at. FaZe is also good at the majority of the time, and I think FaZe is just a better team than them at the end of the day. And so this is kind of the outcome I guess you're going to get. It also kind of seems when they play Atlanta FaZe, they almost kind of like tuck their tails and just kind of submit. Outside of the first series that they played up against Atlanta FaZe, they when they go down and they lose kind of that first hard point, it doesn't really seem like they have the energy or the motivation to fight back. It's just kind of
yeah,
they just seem extremely deflated. It's kind of
they
weird to watch.
they get beat down by FaZe, and I think FaZe knows it. I think they're a bunch of bullies over there. Whenever they play Optic, they just run around and have their way on the map every time. You're right. I think maybe one time it was even remotely close, and since then, FaZe has just had their way with Optic.
Yeah. But that was the last match to close out the weekend. I think all of Sunday, honestly, was pretty disappointing since it was all 3-0s. So
Yeah, it
Sunday
was
was
it was
definitely
quick.
quite boring. But the second matchup that we saw on Thursday, it was Florida Mutineers taking on Toronto, and this was the one upset of the weekend, at least in my eyes. You
True.
had the Florida Mutineers defeat the Toronto Ultra. Toronto Ultra, I think, are the only team that I think could potentially beat FaZe in a best of 9 series at this point. And Florida Mutineers, who have been very inconsistent, obviously, we said when they're on top of their game, they can pretty much beat any team in the game. And this weekend, it seemed like they were on top of their game in every sense of the word.
Yeah.
They went up 2-0 up against the Toronto Ultra. They lost 2, almost got reverse sweeped, but they played a very solid Miami search and destroy to pull out the victory. And I think the biggest difference that I've seen within this Florida Mutineers squad is honestly Neptune. He has
Yes.
played such a pivotal role in their wins at the major and currently in their 2 victories here during stage 4. It's been such a breath of fresh air to have that switch and that kind of added consistency or X factor to this Florida Mutineers lineup. And if he keeps up this performance, I think they're going to slowly rise in the ranks and they could definitely make a push for the top 5, I think, from their kind of 8th place spot. I think if they play at the level they've been playing at, they 100% can beat Minnesota. They could 100% beat Dallas in their current form. And I believe they could probably beat 100 Thieves based on kind of the performance that we saw from them this weekend, and maybe even rival the likes of Chicago Optic, who outside of kind of the tippity top teams of like Atlanta FaZe and Toronto, and I guess maybe you could put New York in there as well, they perform really well. I mean, they 3-0 obliterated Minnesota. So yeah, Florida looked really good. Did you have kind of any other takeaways from their matchup against the Toronto Ultra?
So it was huge what they did against Toronto. This put Florida back kind of in the map and in the conversation. You're definitely right. The biggest change was, in my opinion, it wasn't how much better Neptune's playing. I think what really happened was that Havoc has figured out how to play with Neptune. I think they've really figured out what they need to be doing in order to, move around the map and get stuff done as a sub duo. So they've been pretty prosperous as of late, and I imagine them carrying this momentum forward. I mean, we saw that Florida had a pretty good run last year in the middle of the season, picking up some big championships.
It was around this time too that they
Yeah.
started getting those wins. I think it was the month of June where they really turned online for that month, and they won like 3 majors in a row or something like that.
Yeah, it was
during
nuts.
during that month of June. But
Big Wake
yeah, maybe
is still one of the best players in the game. I think he is getting close to like top 10 in my eyes.
Yeah.
And Skies is just good enough. Like he does what he does on the map. He has crazy plays occasionally, but he plays his role. He stays in his lane, and that allows Neptune and Awakening to just kind of do whatever they want. So
Yeah.
I'm happy as a Florida fan. I'm happy.
Yeah, and on the opposition, Florida, they still put up a solid performance this weekend. Obviously, they came out pretty slow here up against this Florida Mutineers lineup. Obviously, Florida came out on all cylinders, and when they do, they can definitely rival the best in the game, and kind of those Atlanta phases, those Toronto Ultras, and that's kind of what we saw here. But Toronto, they didn't roll over and die. They really brought the series back. They absolutely destroyed them in that control. So Toronto's still looking really strong there. Absolutely 3-0 crushed them on that raid. So Toronto's still looking pretty good there,
Right.
even though with the loss. And then they came back and they absolutely destroyed the Dallas Empire. Swift 3-0 there. And so kind of looking at the Dallas Empire, on like they bring in Vivid. Yes, it's his first week with the team, but he looked like shit. He looked absolutely terrible inside of this Dallas lineup this weekend. Like they brought him in to be that heavy, crazy, high engagement slayer or that played with the team or whatever. And he was at a 0.6 or something on the weekend. Really, really, really bad performance. And crazy stat here, which I'm going to double check it because I couldn't believe it when I kind of looked back at it. But Dallas has not won a control since they dropped Hook. They are currently on an 8-0 loss streak. Or
0-8.
an 0-8. 0-8 losing streak in control. They haven't won it once since they got rid of Hook. And if your control's not good, we've seen it. That's been a really strong backbone for Atlanta and for Toronto. You really do need that to be a solid game mode for you if you want to come out in these best of nines and beat the top competition. That was one of the reasons New York wasn't able to beat Atlanta FaZe, was because there was two controls in that best of nine that they played them in the stage 3 major finals. And Dallas, they haven't won one since they lost Tuke. And it doesn't look like it's getting any better anytime soon.
No, it
So
definitely doesn't. This
what was your opinion, I guess, on Vivid? Because for me, at least this first week, it did not look good. And I realistically don't see Dallas making it back into the top 4 this year.
yeah, Dallas is got a throw in right now. I think really their only hope is getting Hook back, and I don't know if that's gonna happen.
He's benched on 100T.
But I think that the Thieves just hold on to him. I was telling people I think it's a win-win with Hook because you get his fan base and you get everybody getting like hopping over to the Thieves, and Hook's a popular player. With all of his time in Indy. So you pick that up. That just equates into more hoodies sold if he works for the team or if he doesn't work out for the team.
Yeah, it just seems like a bit of a waste of money to me for the Thieves to keep that kind of like franchise face player on your bench. It doesn't make too much sense.
Sure, I don't disagree, and I have no idea what Hook's contract looks like, but Hook still might be the answer for LA Thieves. Like, it's not that they played bad this week. But they only had one game, and it was against Seattle. So I don't know. I think that it's still too early to tell whether or not. Yeah, I'm just not sure. I'm not sure either. I don't think anybody has a clue what's going on over there. Least of all JCap. So
Well, I feel like he has at least a bit better of an idea of what's going on over there than we do. I'll at least give him the benefit of the doubt there, that they're at least trying to do something, at least based on kind of what they were saying during it wasn't like a 100 Thieves podcast, but like pregame show or something. It sounds like they at least understand what the problem was within the team when they had Hook, and they're trying to figure out a way to, in his words, incorporate him into their program. So those are fancy words, but they're good words that I like to hear from teams, that they're not just giving up on a player, that they're actually going to try and work with them and develop them. And that's more than Dallas was willing to do. So I'll give the tip of the hat to them there for at least seeming like they're giving it a bit more effort.
So this is an interesting I guess transition then. We've now seen pretty clearly that numbers don't mean a good player. And it's not that Vivid's a bad player. He's just a terrible teammate in my eyes. Just the way he plays on the map, he's running around, he's doing his own thing. That's why he's getting this crazy score per minute, is because he's running around playing his life, and I don't know. I don't think he's a great objective player either.
So what I was afraid of has come to fruition potentially if we don't see improvements from Vivid.
True. And I don't think it's impossible, and I also don't think it's impossible to find another fourth. They've still got plenty of time, and they have a playoff spot. They will be in the playoffs. Dallas Empire will 100%. They've already got enough points. I don't foresee any other team, unless the bottom half of the leaderboard just picks up nuts challengers kids.
Unless something crazy happens, I don't see Dallas losing their spot. Currently, the only team that is guaranteed champs is Atlanta FaZe, based on, I guess, someone's calculations. They're the only team that has guaranteed themselves a spot, which is crazy since we're only 1 week into stage 4. So
yeah, FaZe is different though. They're like, I mean, your strategy of just picking FaZe every major is, I think that's a pretty good strategy. So I think I'm gonna start doing that.
Not gonna have too many crazy upsets. But that I guess that was Dallas. Dallas, they also played another match. They played up against the London Royal Ravens. They did end up winning that one in game 5. However, we know how terrible London is, one at search and destroy, and two at clutching up game 5s. They've been the worst team in the league at that for kind of 2 seasons now, realistically. However, I don't think they looked too terrible, so to say, with their new players, even though they got 3-0'd by Florida, and they did lose to Dallas, who Dallas we're currently not saying is a very good team. However, I wasn't terribly disappointed in Florida's performance. However, I like their performance the way it was. I think it was just more so kind of how I expected it to go, and they're pretty much at this point out of playoffs contention in my eyes, at least. Florida, as we just saw, if they can keep up what they did this week, then that gap between them and ninth is going to increase. The only team that really seems close enough to fall down the standings enough would be Minnesota. But Minnesota, they're still even at like 150 points simply because of how well they did at the beginning of the season. So I believe London would need to get something like 90 points to make up that gap, which is
Yeah, that's basically
pretty,
impossible.
it's pretty insurmountable from them when they're 100% not going to beat Atlanta FaZe, New York. Well, maybe they could beat New York. They beat New York last stage, but they're not going to beat Toronto. They're not going to beat Atlanta FaZe. I can at least give those two like 100% guarantees that they aren't going to beat those two teams.
Right.
So they're not going to win a major. They're not going to get enough points realistically to pass up those teams. So I think right now they're just trying to end the season on a good note and build up maybe some of the stock for their players if they want to sell them moving into the next season. But that's kind of where I realistically see London. Not bad. Could definitely play upset for, I guess, some of the standings that the teams that are qualifying for champs are fighting for. But outside of that, there's not too much really going for this London Royal Ravens roster. But
Yeah,
with that,
they're definitely not making playoffs.
yeah, with that, that kind of closes out London and Dallas's weekend. And I guess a good thing to go to, since we already kind of touched on it a bit, was LA Thieves. They played up against the Seattle Surge. They got pushed all the way to a game 5 and realistically should have lost the control.
Yeah.
They really, really, really should have lost that control. And one thing I noticed in that control, which they're like, they should have lost it. They could have, should have lost it, but like the streak usage out
Right.
of pros is so fucking atrocious. I cannot believe it. I don't understand how you are so bad at using streaks at just the worst times. It was, and this time it was Draza on 100T. And I literally wrote on my notes, pros suck at using streaks in intelligent ways. They were up like a round or something, and he used his streaks on an offense to try and close it out like super greedily. They didn't need to do that at all.
Yeah.
And then they end up losing that offensive round. They're up 2-1 now after losing the offense. They wanted to try and close it out like 3-0 or something. And then they end up losing the defense because they didn't have the streaks. And then they barely win the next defensive round, like by the skin of their teeth. Or I think they were on offense. They barely won the next offensive round by the skin of their teeth after having to pull off some insane clutch plays, being down like 7-4 in lives with like 20 seconds left to cap the B control point on raid. And I was just like, oh my gosh. Like, I would rather have a player finish the game with streaks than use it in a brain dead way and just waste them. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I don't disagree. Raid is such an easy one to streak on too. I mean,
Yeah.
you're just trying to keep them off B with it. A, you can use it to try and clear them off A, but it's kind of a waste in my opinion. You literally just save them for B bomb or for B dom or the B control point or whatever in um on raid. So it like they get on it, you send your guy money or whatever to check. If it's the guy in the little creddy corner under L, did you call an artillery in right there and you get him. Um so I like the artillery games that you can have with people. If it's a bunch of people on the hill and you call artillery, then you can throw some weird timings at them so they hop out of money and into an artillery. So
Yeah, it's just so frustrating watching good teams like Toronto just play control at such a high intelligent level, and then looking at teams like Atlanta FaZe where they're just wastefully using streaks that they earned on offensive pushes that weren't even good pushes. Like no one was even like anywhere close to the hill. They were just using streaks for the hell of it. It seemed like and it was just oh gosh. All right, we need to move on. That's just gonna piss me off so much. But Thieves, they looked absolutely atrocious in Hardpoint. They looked pretty good in S&D, and they were up against Seattle, who is by far the worst team in the CDL. Paris is fighting for that spot, but
no, Seattle's pretty
yeah,
bad.
Seattle's really bad. I think Seattle, funnily enough, their their control loss streak is the same as the Dallas Empire. They're also on a 0-8 losing streak in control. However, their record in control is 4-17. Yeah, 4-17. Really bad there. Their best game mode, funnily enough, is their S&D. But yeah, Seattle, they're out of contention. They're pretty much hopeless. I didn't see too many great things out of Classic. I feel like they might hit some better consistency with him than they would have with Decimate. Since I feel like Classic fits that team a lot better, having prior chemistry and kind of the type of player that he is, I think fits the type of player Pristini is. Probably the best out of the two other players that they've had in that role, being Looney and Decimate. So I do think what I saw this weekend, it was an improvement. However, it's too late into the season for them to really go anywhere since they're in dead last in the standings with, I believe, only 40 points. And yeah, they need to get something like 110 points and have Minnesota get none for the rest of the season. And I don't see that happening. So I think we're just good to move on there. And that was actually, I don't know, we had one more match that weekend. We had the LA Gorillas up against the New York Subliners. And the New York Subliners, they took that 3-1. I think that was to be expected. Both you and I are pretty high on this New York squad. They just need to get better in control and a bit better in their S&D. Their S&D it's not terrible, but definitely their control was something that we talked about that they needed to improve on coming out of that stage 3 major. And I do believe they actually did pick up the win here up against the Gorillas in that. Yeah, they 3-0'd them on Garrison. So not bad. Looking like they got some improvement there in the control, at least up against the Gorillas. But those were the matches for this prior weekend. And I think, unless you have anything to add to that, we'll jump into our power rankings.
Yeah, I'm definitely ready.
All righty. So we haven't done power rankings since the beginning of the season. And let's see, at the start of the season, both you and I had Atlanta FaZe at S. You had Chicago at S. I had them at A. Both of us had Dallas Empire at S. You had Florida Mutineers at C. I had them at B. Both of us had London Royal Ravens at C. LA Gorillas, you had C. I had at D. Minnesota Rocker, you had at B. I had at C. Subliners, you had at A. I had at B. Both of us had the Thieves at A. I had Paris Legion at E. You had them at D. Seattle Surge, we both had them at B. That's probably a big disappointment there. Toronto Ultra, I had them at B. You had them at A. So we're actually pretty good with that Toronto Ultra ranking, and I think Dallas was definitely there at the start of the season. I think the one team that has disappointed us the most once again, this season has been Seattle Surge. I think I probably put way too much stock in Looney as a player. And while he is an intelligent player, if you have an intelligent player that can't win a gunfight, that doesn't mean shit.
Yeah,
And that's
true.
kind of what I'm learning now. And I think the pros need to learn now that you can have an intelligent player, but if you can't shoot back, it doesn't really mean much. So I think we'll go top to bottom, or I guess we'll go our S ranked teams, and then we'll kind of go down the list. So currently for me, my only two S ranked teams are Atlanta FaZe and Toronto Ultra. Do you have any different? I see you
I
put New
put
York
the
Subliners.
subliners as well. So I think there are three S tier teams right now, and it has 100% to do with the fact that Hydra is a different breed. I just watching this guy move on the map is insanity. Um, the the subliners have hit new levels, and they continue to hit new levels, and you can never count out Clayster. So as of right now, the subliners also fit in that spot of, hey, we're in this to win this. So
Okay, yeah, I will respectfully disagree. The reason being is just the difference between kind of you look at Atlanta FaZe, you look at Toronto. Their map pool is insanely large. They have
true.
two control maps that both of them are absolutely disgusting at, being Garrison and Raid. If you go to their records, let's see, like the Atlanta FaZe, they are 11-3 on Garrison and 11-2 on Raid. You look at the side of Toronto Ultra, they're 7-2 on Garrison and they're 12-7 on Raid. A lot of those losses on Raid being earlier in the season. So both of those are stacked control teams. By far some of the best, by far the best control teams in the league. Subliners, they're not there. They have a pretty bad losing record in control at 11-17. I'm going to need to see that come up a lot if I want to move on them into S tier. One of the things keeping them so high up in my placements is honestly their hardpoint record, which they've been absolutely filthy at as
True.
of recently. They're 29-14 in hardpoint, with a lot of those losses being early in the season. Obviously, they went on an 11-0 win streak in hardpoints, and I believe they've only lost like 4 hardpoints or something along those lines since April, which is kind of like the latter half of the season. And then their S&D record, they're at a positive rate in that. They're at 18-17. So 50-50 in that. That's good. It's really just that control for me that's keeping them outside of this S rank contention, where we do see like these teams such as Toronto Ultra and Atlanta FaZe that have such a large depth in their map pool and that are clean
Right.
across every game mode.
Yeah, I can see your points there. Their control could use some work, but I think that they'll come into fruition as Hydra gets more comfortable with the roster.
Yeah. And so moving down to, I guess, the A ranks, I'm going to put Chicago and I'm going to put the New York Subliners both in that A tier currently for me. I think both of those are pretty solid A tier teams, even though they have some clear, I think, weaknesses up against the top echelon teams. They've proven kind of their consistency, I think, against the lower seeded teams. Uh, and I think they're probably the closest ones to elevating themselves up into that S tier. They just kind of need to solidify certain things in a couple of their game modes, and they at least have one game mode where they are really good at, or they're pretty good at all the game modes, which I think is kind of more so that Chicago Optic squad, where they're pretty good at all the game modes. They're just not stellar at them yet, and at least up against the top seeded team. Whereas New York, they're like really good at hardpoint, 50-50 at search and destroy, and then okay, but not great at control. But I see you have, I think, a couple other teams in your A tier. I see Florida Mutineers is also in your A tier.
Yeah, I put Optic, of course. I mean, they're still nasty. They're still gonna beat a majority of teams out there on any given Sunday. Um, aside from what they struggle with at the top, they're still a really solid team. And I also have Florida because recently, and I know this is a little bit recency bias, but recently they've really started to hit strides. Um, and I imagine them carrying this momentum going into this week. So if they pull off a big major win, I'm going to feel confident leaving them at A for the rest of the time. But for right now, they are looking like they could be dangerous in stage 4 major. So I put them in
Yeah.
A.
Yeah, I believe they play New York this coming weekend, which if they are able to pull out a victory up against the subliners, then that I think is going to be a pretty big statement since they already did take down the toughest team in the group in the Toronto Ultra. And kind of speaking of groups, honestly, I think the New York subliners, they honestly blessed Optic with a much easier group that's going to help them maintain their spot in the standings, and I actually gave themselves a much tougher group, leaving Toronto on their side, and then you also have Florida over there as
True.
well, who is a big wild card. For me, though, the sole perpetrator of B is going to be that Florida Mutineers squad. They've looked good of recent, but time and time again they've just been so inconsistent where they just have a fantastic week or maybe a couple of weeks, and then they really kind of simmer down and start losing matches that they wouldn't have in prior weeks. And so until I see kind of a consistent performance from them throughout this stage, I don't feel comfortable putting them up in that A tier with the likes of New York and Optic, where we've seen kind of a long stint of success. But they're definitely etching towards that A tier kind of with their past performance this weekend. But because of kind of their history, I'm going to keep them at B, and they're actually going to be my only team in B tier.
Well, I have 3 teams in B tier, so you have a big old C soup, I guess. Um,
It's actually not too big. I think I only have like 3 or 2 teams in my C tier.
You know what? Actually, I'm gonna change one of mine right now. So I have 2 teams in B tier. I have Empire and I have the Thieves.
Yep,
Um,
those are actually both of my C tier teams.
oh,
I'm
okay.
putting them right below Florida. So
Dang, so you
we
just
do,
have a
you
ton of C tier or D tier teams. That is so funny.
I might be going all the way to E,
Oh,
potentially
jeez.
F. We'll see. I think there's a pretty good disparity between like your upper echelon, your middle echelon, your middle of the pack teams, your lower middle, and then your bottom of the barrel. I think there's actually a pretty good disparity in where teams are. And I think that is evidence from our predictions last week. I mean, we were pretty freaking solid. If
I
we're
don't know if there's really an F tier team because all of them can win.
Yeah, F tier might have a little bit too low, but
They all have the potential to win. It's just, are they going to? Is a different story. So, so yes. So for my C tier, I've got LAG, Minnesota Rocker, and Paris Legion. And Paris Legion's kind of new just because their search and destroy is really solid, like scarily solid. It seems like everybody's going off. Scraps is a beast. Temp is always gonna do temp things. Aqua's good, and oh, and Zap fit in the roster pretty well. So I'm feeling pretty comfortable about Paris Legion sitting in C tier for now. They're the last man out in the playoffs, but you know they're still like not a great team. So if I had to change any of those, it would be Paris, and I would probably bump them to D. But I'll put them at C for now.
yeah, I honestly think well, I guess because I have Florida in their soul tier and I don't have to have them in that A tier. Mine are, I guess, like one rank lower
Right.
realistically, but it's kind of just more how I'm pairing them up.
That's fair.
So in my D tier, what I guess would be your C tier, I'm actually going to put London, Gorillas, and Minnesota. I feel like what I've seen from those teams, I like better than kind of what I've seen from the Paris Legion, even with some pretty strong hardpoint performances up against FaZe. I think FaZe was probably realistically just slacking and more so focusing on their optic match
True.
at the end of the weekend. And while we saw a really good performance from Paris in search, like they 6-1 Atlanta on standoff and then they 6-1 Minnesota on raid, Minnesota's looked like shit in S&D, uh, quite literally. since kind of their 5-0 start.
Right.
They've looked really bad in search. And Atlanta, they played really bad on Express when it first got added. And I think we're going to see a similar thing here with Standoff, where it takes them a while to actually develop any real feasible confidence on that map. I mean, they didn't play it up against Optic because Optic they absolutely destroyed Minnesota. They thought they weren't that good on it. And so they defaulted to Express, which they weren't good at the beginning of the season on that map, and they were able to beat Optic on it this time around. So I think that's kind of a similar thing that we're seeing, because outside of this 12-2 week in Search and Destroy from Paris, they're abysmal at that mode. They're the second worst team in the league in Search and Destroy. The only team that's worse than them is the London Royal Ravens. London Royal Ravens are 8-23, 8-23 in Search and Destroy. Paris, they're 9-16. They haven't even hit double digits in their Search and Destroy record. So I think Paris's saving grace is that they're okay-ish at hardpoint. That's kind of really what they've been surviving on, I guess, throughout the season. But that's off the back of a lot of Garrison hardpoint wins.
True.
Half of their hardpoint wins are from Garrison, and they have finally started to lose that game mode relatively consistently on that map. So I'm not seeing a lot of faith from this Paris Legion lineup. And for that reason, I'm going to keep them out of my D tier. And I'm actually going to have London in my D tier with Guerrillas and with Minnesota. I think Minnesota's on a downward trend, and we could see them move into potentially that Paris Legion Seattle Surge bottom ranking.
Yeah.
Potentially, if this trend continues. And I've kind of liked what I've seen from London and Guerrillas. I've liked what I've seen from Guerrillas kind of all of stage 3, where they were able to push teams a distance really consistently, and they played teams close. And London, while they did lose to Dallas and got absolutely stomped by Florida, I feel like there's still like some weird magic with that roster that it's not going to get them to playoffs, but I think there's at least some kind of upset potential.
So you're
where
saying
I could
there's a
actually,
chance.
not to make playoffs, but to at least beat teams that they shouldn't,
Sure.
and make the playoff race for seeding a little more interesting to some teams. And they actually looked a lot better than I thought they would have with the first week back with Alex. He didn't skip a beat. He actually looked pretty darn solid.
Yeah, Alex is a beast.
So I'm feeling pretty good.
Actually, they all looked pretty solid. Like it wasn't an awful game. Like London looked okay. It's just I don't know if they're ready yet. They're not.
Yeah.
Like they're starting to find form. We'll see if it equates to anything. I sincerely doubt it. I have them in my D tier with Seattle Surge.
Yeah, I feel like kind of the bottom two tiers that we have, for you, it's your D and your C. For me, it's my D and my E. I feel like some of these teams are relatively interchangeable.
True.
Like even Seattle Surge potentially. I mean, I have LA Thieves in my C tier, and Seattle Surge realistically they should have beat the Thieves in their matchup this weekend. If they hadn't absolutely massively choked on that raid, they would have won it 3-1. So like I could potentially see Seattle be in D tier, but they lost it, and I don't think they're really gonna get that kind of chance again.
No, they're not. Like Seattle's fucked. Like they're the Cleveland Browns of the CDL. I don't know how many times I'm going to say that, but they really are.
They're worse than the Browns. They're like the Dolphins.
Oh no, they're like the Browns before.
It's the aquatic theme better too.
True. Yep. All right. I think that wraps it up for power rankings. Pretty satisfied.
Yeah. So I think we're pretty much in agreement. Like our power ranks are pretty similar. Not too much disparity there. I think the big difference was that I had Florida kind of in their own tier by themselves, simply because of some of the inconsistencies from them.
Right.
But outside of that, I think we were pretty much in agreement on most of the stuff. So good to see there. And I think with that, we're going to move into our predictions for week 2. of stage 4. So kicking off the weekend, not an interesting matchup. It's going to be Atlanta FaZe going up against Seattle Surge.
3-0.
Yeah, I'm thinking that's a 3-0.
3-0.
Atlanta takes it and going to the coin. It's got to redeem itself. It's going with tails, so it is going with Atlanta. It's making some smarter guesses this time around.
Boyd said hot 3-0.
Yeah. Next matchup, though, we got LAG going up the Dallas Empire. This one is definitely interesting since LA Grills, they pushed Dallas really far last time. Dallas has not looked good at all. And I feel like this is a bit of a grudge match. I mean, you got Vivid gone from the Gorillas on Dallas. He's going to want to prove himself, and LAG is going to want to prove that he was not as good as he thinks he is or something along those lines.
For 1 second, I actually had LAG beating Dallas. I had it 3-2, but I have it 2-3 Dallas now.
Yeah, so. I feel like I got to spice it up a bit,
This would be the one. This would be the one.
This would be the one. Yeah, I'm gonna give it to LAG.
Yeah,
I'm gonna switch it up. Can't always go get a 90% on the week. Sometimes you gotta.
Sometimes you gotta get a 40%.
Yeah. The coin's gonna go with Dallas though. So, coin's looking to beat me this week. It didn't feel good about its 40% week. Wants to see me with a 40% week. So, I'm not going to let that happen though. Moving on to our Friday matchup, we got Paris Legion going up LA Thieves. I do think LA Thieves are going to rebound from their really poor performance up against the Surge. I think they're probably just getting back into the swing of things after having TJ benched.
I think they're just going to lose the Surge just because Paris is on one right now. They're just playing weird, and that's going to win them Surge games for a while. At least for stage 4.
Yeah, we definitely could see that happen. I think that was something that we saw kind of last season or in prior stages and seasons where Paris, they were kind of really quick to pick up new maps. And it's looking like, at least with Standoff, that's kind of what we saw the prior week. But I think LA Theaters are really they won both searches pretty darn convincingly last weekend. So I got a decent amount of faith in them in their search and destroy. But yeah, I'm going to agree with you 3-1. Last Friday matchup is probably the best matchup so far of the weekend. That LA Gorillas one versus Dallas isn't too bad either. That one should be pretty interesting. But it's going to be the Florida Mutineers taking on the New York Subliners.
Are we going to differ again?
I'm thinking, that you're going with Florida 3-2 over Subliners. Like, this one could definitely go either way depending on what Florida we see. I'm going to give it to New York. I'm going to say it's a 3-1, though, for New York.
Dang.
Last time they played, it was a really swift 3-0. New York absolutely smoked them in the search and destroy. It was like a 6-0. The hard point wasn't all that close.
Yeah.
And even with New York's relatively poor control record, they still put up a solid performance up against this Florida Mutineers lineup. And I feel like they have, as long as they don't play Florida on raid hardpoint, which I believe they're like 5-0 on or something like that, they'll be fine. I do believe. Yeah.
We'll
Florida
see.
Mutineers 5-0 raid hardpoint. On average, they're winning by 60 points. The only other team with an undefeated hardpoint record is London Royal Ravens on Apocalypse, who are also 5-0. And on average, they're winning that by 84 points.
Jeez.
So stay away from those two teams on those two maps. Unless you're just Atlanta FaZe and you can
just do it.
You can just do it. Do whatever you want.
Yeah, whatever you want. Whatever you'd like, your Atlanta FaZe. You can just
I'm gonna go New York. I got confidence in the NYS boys. Hopefully, don't disappoint. Coin's gonna agree. It's going with NYS. Next matchup, moving on to Saturday. This is probably a pretty quick one. London versus Toronto. That's 3-1 for me. Pretty easy.
Ultra as fuck.
Maybe like a slight grudge match or something, simply because it's two European teams or something like that. I don't really know. But Coin's gonna go with London though. It wants to be wrong.
That's
hopefully.
fine. 50%.
50. It's got to get. Well, actually, it's got to get 60% this week if it wants to
Oh,
reach 50%.
fair.
Because it got 40% last week. But yeah, next Saturday matchup, Paris for Chicago. Weirdly enough, I feel like Chicago might struggle in this matchup, so I'm going to say it 3-2 for Chicago over Paris. I'm going to give it to the event in the end, but something about seeing Paris's name versus Chicago name just gives me like some PTSD from last season or something like that.
Right.
Where Chicago would always struggle with them. Coin's going to go with Paris. But yeah, I do agree. Paris will probably lose this matchup versus Chicago. Our last Saturday matchup should also be a pretty interesting one. It seems like the last matchup of Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, all really interesting ones. It's going to be Seattle Surge taking on the Minnesota Rocker. And so you have a 3-2 for Seattle.
Yeah,
here.
that's probably blasted, but I mean, if Seattle's gonna win a game, it's probably against a Minnesota team that's still trying to feel themselves out. Seattle has a tendency to win these kind of games. So we'll see. This is their only. Or sorry, they get beat by FaZe, which, I mean, if I'm Seattle, I probably just don't even care. All right, it's FaZe. Like we'll do our best, but there's no
Yeah.
like if you can come out on the respawn, maybe you go a little bit harder on the search, but I just think that they're just gonna get bodied and disappointed. So I think they're gonna focus a little bit more on Minnesota. Hopefully, hit the regain. Minnesota hasn't been looking great, so we shall see.
Yeah, the thing is, like, both of these teams are equally bad at hard point. They're both equally okay as that search. The real difference is that Minnesota, since acquiring Standy, has actually been an okay control team.
Yeah.
And Seattle's just absolutely abysmal at that mode. So
Yeah, they
to
don't
take
know
out
what
the
control is.
win, to take the win, you like for Seattle, you need to take at least you need to take 2 S&Ds or 2 hard points here up against Minnesota, which I unfortunately don't see happening, even with kind of a not so terrible performance and an actually pretty darn good hardcore performance that we did see from them up against the Thieves. I would
Sure.
like to get this to Seattle. I realistically see that being the more likely outcome in this series. However, I'm going to end up differing and giving it to Minnesota in a game 5.
Yeah, it's gonna go to game 5. These both these teams are kind of
I think Minnesota
neck and
either
neck.
wins it 3-1 or they win it 3-2.
Hmm.
Well, actually, if it goes game 5, I feel like they could go either way.
Yeah,
But if it's a 3-1, it's got to be Minnesota because I don't see Seattle
I
winning
agree.
2 hard points and an S&D. Coin's going to agree. Coin's going Minnesota. So we'll see who's right in that prediction. Then we're going to move on to our Sunday matchups. Right off the bat, we got LAG versus Florida Mutineers. It's like Florida. They would lose to LAG, just saying. You have that 3-0 there for Florida over LAG.
It would be, but I'm telling you, Florida's just. I think they're hitting different levels
Florida
now.
deny their brand? Does Florida deny the brand?
I mean, they went 2-0, and they beat
They
Toronto.
They did have a 2-0 week. They don't have 0-2 weeks. So I have them losing to New York. So am I wrong again? Do they have a 2-0 week here? It's the same thing where they have that one matchup that they should lose and then the one matchup they should win.
Yep.
So I gotta give it Florida over LAG. I think they drop a map. I put enough respect on LAG's name to at least take a map off this Florida Mutineers lineup.
Nah, Florida hit different.
Coin's going to agree. Florida's taking it. So we're on agreement there. Next Sunday matchup, it's the LA Thieves versus the Atlanta FaZe. Yeah, that's a pretty easy one for me. That's a big old 3-1 in agreement there. Atlanta should take it.
Yeah, they might pick up like a hard point or something. So
yeah,
maybe first hard point.
Depending on the S&D map, I could see Thieves taking an S&D.
Yeah, true. Especially with TJ being back on the roster. So
yep.
Coin goes with Atlanta.
Coin's going with Atlanta. And then the last matchup, which would have been an interesting one, but at this point, I don't think it really is. It's going to be Dallas versus New York Subliners. I'm saying this is a 3-1 for Subliners over Dallas. So realistically, on Sunday, we could have another really boring day of matches. I mean, you have a 3-0, two 3-0s, and a 3-1. But Atlanta could definitely 3-0 LA Thieves. So we could have a incredibly boring Sunday once again, which I hope does not happen. But if it doesn't happen, then I won't be right. So I do and I don't hope it happens. But the coin is in agreement. It's going with New York. So I think the coin and I only disagree 2 times, 3 times, 3 times, 4 times. No, we disagree a couple of times. The coin has a really solid chance, at least in my eyes, of having a 60% week and getting back to a 50% on average prediction ratio. I have some wild ones in there with LAG over Dallas. And then I guess the only other one I'm kind of nervous about, I guess, is Florida versus New York. That's one that could definitely go either way. And then Seattle versus Minnesota. Realistically, only the last match of the day on Friday, Saturday, and Thursday. I think those are the big ones to watch for upset potential and for really kind of competitive matches where it's going to a game 5. On your predictions, those are the only 3 going to a game 5. So I think we're pretty in agreement there.
Yeah, for sure.
But I do think that is going to be it from us for this episode. So I hope you guys all had a fantastic Memorial Day weekend, enjoyed some Call of Duty, maybe some beers if you're of age, some hamburgers, hot dogs, and maybe you went to some parades. I don't know, got some candy from some parades. I always enjoyed that when I was a kid. But that's going to be it from us. We have another weekend of Call of Duty action. Hope you guys all have a fantastic weekend and sit down and watch some. But that's going to be it from us. We will see you next time.
Later.